everyone, today we're going to read Don't Be Silly, Mr. Twiddle. Chapter 3 Mr. Twiddle's Pear. Once Mr. Twiddle went out walking by himself, for it was a very fine day indeed. Twiddle's feet got very hot walking, and he wished to put on his big boots. He felt very thirsty too, and wondered if Sally Simple would let him have a drink when he passed by her house. "I'll ask her," he thought. He walked along the road, and he came to the shops. Next door to the boot shop, there was a fine pear tree overhanging the street wall. On it were several green pears, nearly ripe. Mr. Twiddle stared at them in delight. Now a pear to eat, a nice juicy pear when he was almost dying of thirst, would be simply lovely. He wondered if he should call in at the boot shop and ask the man to let him have one of the pears of the pear tree, but he didn't quite like to do that, so he stood at the door of the shop and turned over the boots that were on sale on a big stall in front of the door. The shopman saw him and came forward. He bowed to Mr. Twiddle and spoke to him politely. "What can I do for you this morning, sir? Would you like one of those pears?" He meant, of course, would Twiddle like a pair of boots and the shoes he was looking at, but Twiddle's mind was full of the pears hanging over the wall. His heart gave a jump of joy when he heard the shopman say that. He smiled all over his face. "Would I like a pear?" he said, beaming. "I should think I would. How nice of you to suggest it." "Well," the shopman said, "you are a very polite customer, I might say. Now, what kind of pear would you like? What colour? Black or brown?" Mr. Twiddle felt a bit puzzled. He hadn't heard of black pears before, so he thought brown ones might be a bit overripe. So he looked at the shopman and said, "Well, Mr. Shopman, I think I'd rather have a yellow pear if you don't mind. I always like them best." The shopman pursed his lips up and frowned. "Well, I'm very sorry, sir, but I haven't had a single yellow pear today. They're all black or brown, but come in this afternoon and maybe I'll have one for you. I can send the other end of town to my brother. He may have a fine yellow pear." "Oh, pray don't bother to do that," said Mr. Twiddle. He looked at the green pears in the tree. Green pear would do quite well, you know. They're a little bit hard, that's the only thing. Yellow pears are nice and soft." The shopman began to think that Mr. Twiddle was just a little mad. "I haven't had any green pears either today," he said gruffly. You can come along in an hour and I will have a yellow pear for you. What size would you like?" "Oh, as large as possible, please," said Twiddle eagerly, thinking of how lovely it would be to sink his teeth into an enormous ripe yellow pear and taste the sweet juice. The shopman looked down at Twiddle's feet. They didn't look very large to him. "All right, a large yellow pear. And would you like a laced pear or a button pear?" Twiddle stared at the shopman, thinking that he must be a little mad. He had never in his life heard of a pear with laces or buttons. After all, if you wanted to, you took the skin off a pear, and you didn't unbutton or unlace it. "He'll be asking if I want hooks and eyes on it next," thought Twiddle. Really, he is a most peculiar man. "I don't think I want my pear laced or buttoned," said Twiddle. Just plain, if you know what I mean." "I see," said the shopman, not quite seeing it all. "Well, do you want a tongue?" Of course, he meant Twiddle does if he wants a tongue inside his shoes, but Twiddle didn't know that. He stared again at the shopman and felt a little angry. "Do I want a tongue?" he said. "Well, I haven't been talking with my tongue all this time. Why should I want another? Oh, look, here's mine. Goodbye. I'll come back in an hour's time for a nice yellow pear without laces or buttons and with no tongue." Mr. Twiddle had put out his tongue to show the shopman that he had one, and the shopman thought he was being rude. He gazed after Twiddle and shook his head. "He seemed like such a nice man at first," he said, "but he must be mad. Quite mad. Well, I'll send over to my brother's and see if he has got a nice yellow pair of boots without shoes without laces, buttons, or tongues. His brother did have a pair. They were bright yellow shoes with elastic sides. He was glad to get rid of them because he hadn't been able to sell them. The shopman who had talked to Twiddle looked out for him in an hour's time, and sure enough, there he was coming back to see if he could have a nice juicy yellow pair. "Good day again," called the shopman. "I've got that yellow pair just for you. Just your size too, look." Twiddle stared in dismay at the bright yellow shoes. He simply couldn't bear them. He knew that Mrs. Twiddle wouldn't like them either. "Why are you offering me shoes?" he said in astonishment. "I meant a pair to eat, you know, like those growing on that tree over there. I was thirsty. Can't you give me one of those pairs, please? I don't want this pair of shoes. They are dreadful." This made the shopman quite angry. "They are fine shoes," he cried. "You ordered them, didn't you? It's all very well for you to say you wanted a pair off the tree now, but what you asked me was a pair of yellow shoes without laces, buttons, or tongues. And here they are. Pay me for them, please." Now look here, he began Mr. Twiddle, feeling rather frightened. "This won't do. I'll buy a pair off your tree, but I won't buy those yellow shoes. How much will you charge me for a pair off that tree?" "It's not my tree," said the shopman, and he looked fiercely at Twiddle. "It doesn't grow in my garden. It grows next door. Now, what about these shoes? They cost £1 and they're a bargain. Pay up, please, or I'll have to go and tell that policeman over there you've been making fun of me and you won't pay my bill." The policeman looked a bit fierce, so Twiddle gave a deep sigh and felt in his pocket. He pulled out a handful of coins and showed them to the man. "That's all I've got," he said. "Well, it's 2.5 pence short," said the man, but I'll let you off that. You want to put the shoes on now?" "Oh, no, thank you," said Mr. Twiddle quickly. "No, I'll carry them." So poor Twiddle went home with the bright yellow shoes and tried to hide them in the boot cupboard right at the very back. But Mrs. Twiddle caught sight of them before he put them there and called out in surprise, "Twiddle, are those yellow daffodils you've got? Put them in the water, my dear man. Don't put them in the boot cupboard." So poor Twiddle had to show Mrs. Twiddle the shoes, and I really couldn't find to tell you what she said. It will fill this whole book and then want a few more pages beside. He hadn't worn the shoes yet, and I don't somehow think he ever will. He does make some funny mistakes, doesn't he? Thank you all for listening. Until next time, it was me, Mira. Goodbye. Switch off your telly.